Well, hello there and welcome to this special edition of Sustaining Saint Lucia from the 21st session of the Conference of Parties on Climate Change. I am Shannon LeBon. Coming up on this special episode, two Caribbean artists take COP21 by storm and help amplify the region's voice. And HDS's Alison Kentish, the winner of the Saint Lucia Media Climate Change Challenge, sits down for a candid interview with Senator the Honourable Dr. James Fletcher.
Also coming up on this episode of the program, we'll speak to Saint Lucia's Chief Climate Change Negotiator Crispin on ongoing negotiations here in Paris. And we'll take you inside the plenary hall to hear from OECS Director General Dr. Didacus, Jules. Okay, Dr. Fletcher, it's Wednesday. We're about getting to the home stretch. Just give us an idea of how things have been going so far.
Well, I think they've been going in some areas well. In other areas, we haven't seen as much progress as probably we would like. There are one or two issues that unfortunately I think have become bigger issues than they ought to. So for example, the whole question of special circumstances and unique vulnerabilities of SIDS, which we've always said is one of these sacrosanct, non-negotiable areas. We've seen that being challenged, and challenged in quarters that we would not expect, challenged from within our own larger G77 group, which is unfortunate. And our negotiators and our ministers have had to defend that very vigorously and make it clear that that is not an issue that we will allow any sort of discussion on. The loss and damage discussions, I think, are still very delicately poised. There are still some insoluble issues. One of them in particular is the question of liability and compensation. The US and the other members of the umbrella group, the EU, Australia, New Zealand, they have all said that if they are going to agree to loss and damage appearing in the text of the agreement, they want an exclusionary clause that says that loss and damage will not give rise to any claims of liability and compensation. As Caribbean, AOSIS, G77, we've said that we're not happy with that, we can't accept that. And we've not been able to bridge that gap. So on the one hand, you have the umbrella group insisting on that exclusionary clause, and on our case, we say we can't accept that exclusionary clause. There are one or two other issues, like discussions about the displacement facility that we would like to see in there. And there's some discussion about whether displacement facility gets mentioned. Does it get mentioned in the text of the agreement, or does it get mentioned in a COP decision? There's also an issue where loss and damage is concerned of how is it reflected? Is it seen as a separate paragraph, which is what we want, or does it come in a paragraph after adaptation, which we are not comfortable with because it suggests that loss and damage is a continuation of adaptation, which is something we've always fought against. There has been some progress on 1.5 degrees Celsius as a temperature goal, which is what we thought would actually be the most difficult issue. But the 1.5 degrees Celsius coalition has grown. We've heard countries that previously never associated themselves with 1.5 degrees, making very strong and positive statements in support of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Australia, Canada has made a very strong statement in support of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And countries that in the past were pushing against 1.5 are now saying that we understand the importance of 1.5 to SIDS and other vulnerable countries, and we are willing to consider some level of formulation. So the like-minded developing countries like Malaysia, countries like India, are saying that they are willing to consider some sort of formulation that would see 1.5 reflected in the text of the agreement. And South Africa put out a very positive statement on how it could see 1.5 reflected in the text, which many countries have associated themselves with. Unfortunately, I cannot say a lot about 1.5 because I'm co-facilitating the team that is looking at ambition, and the ambition discussion really revolves around the temperature goal, around the long-term mitigation goal cycle. So I can't play the role of a Caribbean negotiator where that is concerned. I have to step back and be one of the friends of the president that is trying to to address those differences. But I can say that we've made good progress on 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we've also made good progress on the whole issue of cycles. There seems to be convergence around the idea of a 5-year cycle.
In terms of the Caribbean, even in terms of Saint Lucia, climate change, I think people have become more aware of climate change, the impacts. In terms of PR, we've done a lot. So for the people back home who are following the daily reports, would you say today, as of today, optimism is still high for legally binding agreements?
I think optimism is high for a legally binding agreement. I think, however, what we are not clear on is whether all elements of the agreement will be legally binding. So, for example, whether the mitigation targets that have been put forward in the INDCs, whether these will be legally binding. Some parties have said that they are uncomfortable with those targets being legally binding. The United States, for example, has said that it does not believe that it will be able to get legally binding targets through their Congress, and that has been a point that has been made by the U.S. negotiators, and also President Obama, when he met with a small group of island prime ministers. Now Prime Minister was included. I was in that meeting, expressed some reservation there. The issue of finance, I don't know whether all elements of finance will be legally binding. We know that there is already a commitment for $100 billion annually from the year 2020. So I have to find out what's happening in the finance negotiations. But there is a very strong and growing interest in having an ambitious, strong agreement. I think many people, what we've called the Strong Ambition Coalition, that coalition is growing. There was fear at one point that you'd have a kind of lowest common denominator agreement, but the French president of the COP21, Laurent Fabius, has sent a very clear signal and a very strong signal that he wants this to be an ambitious agreement. And he really has to be complimented for the guidance, the leadership, the focus that he has put into this, how inclusive and party-driven he's ensured that the process is. So you're not hearing grumbling and people muttering about side deals being cut. Everybody is very happy with the fact that this is still a very party-driven process, very transparent process. And I am guardedly optimistic that one, we will conclude on Friday, and we will conclude on Friday with a good agreement, and particularly a good agreement for Saint Lucia and other Caribbean and AOC SIDS.
Would you be interested in some sort of debt swapping arrangement for adaptation financing?
I know that's an issue that UNECLAC has been speaking of, the whole question of debt swaps, and it's a matter, I think, that has to be discussed much more fully. One of the things that we've always said is that these disasters are what have really crippled the finances of our countries and have reduced our fiscal space, because we always have to be going through this cycle of repair and recovery. It's difficult for you to find money to invest in education, in healthcare, because Saint Lucia has to recover from Thomas, and before Saint Lucia has recovered from Thomas, it has to recover from a trough. Dominica now has 100% of its GDP wiped out from Tropical Storm Erica. And it's not just GDP, it's lives, it's communities like Petit Savan that will no longer exist where they were and now have to be relocated, and the dislocation that causes to people, to livelihoods, to economies. So if we are to move forward, if we are to get out of this perpetual cycle of repair and recovery, to get out of this position where we're always going cap in hand to our partners, we have to be given, one, some level of relief from the debts that we've had to incur because of extreme weather events, and secondly, we have to be given access to climate financing so that we can make those investments to make us more climate resilient. So it's a question, I think, that is very broad in its dimensions, but the debt swap is something that I think certainly has to be considered.
I'm sure you're extremely pleased on the role that the artists have been playing here at COP21.
These guys are phenomenal. I mean, not just in drawing attention to the 1.5 message, but also in showing that this is not just negotiators who are invested in climate change. Artists are invested in climate change. We had our young people, the members of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. They were so involved. I mean, I was being interviewed by them. They're going around. So the engagement of civil society, the engagement of our artists has been, for me, one of the good things about this COP, because it's meant that we've had an army, a team behind us, and it's given us that wing underneath our, underneath our wings that has really propelled us forward. And I mean, they've been phenomenal. Both the artists who are here, but also the artists who are back home in the Caribbean. You know, the work that people like Kendall Hippolyte is doing. Yves Renard is coordinating through Panos, and people like Royan Descartes with the photos that he's put up. Tariba Do Nascimento with her bags that you're seeing all over the place. Just phenomenal work, and it makes it that much easier for you to fight on. It makes it that much easier for you to go from meeting to meeting, because you know that maybe for the first time the Caribbean is behind us, the Caribbean knows what we're doing, and the Caribbean will not allow us to come back home if we don't get what it is that we set out to get.
St. Lucia, small island state from the Caribbean, has been getting a lot of international coverage. I mean, major publications. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's actually been quite encouraging, because today I was interviewed by AFP of France, and they asked, how do small island states feel in these negotiations? Do we feel that our voices are not being heard? And I said, just the very fact that you're interviewing me from AFP says that our voices are being heard. Just the fact that I, as a St. Lucian minister, am one of a very small group of 14 ministers chosen by Laura Fabius to take part in facilitation, to arrive at a common position, shows that our voices are being heard. And you're right, I mean, St. Lucia has gotten press from Washington Post, from the New Zealand Herald, from Politico, from BBC. We continue to be bombarded with requests for interviews, so it's good. I think it's getting our message across. It's making people realize that St. Lucia is very invested in this, that we are doing very positive things, both at the negotiating end, but also at home. The leadership that we are showing, that although we are minor emitters, insignificant emitters of greenhouse gases, that we still understand we have a moral responsibility to reduce our emissions. So some of the things we're doing is solar head of state and others. So the press has been good, and the press so far has been very favorable. So yes, I think it's good for St. Lucia, and hopefully it's also good for our tourism product. People will see St. Lucia in another light, that we're not just the Pitors and the Sulphur Springs and the best wedding and honeymoon destination in the world, but we're also good at articulating issues on behalf of small island developing states. So it's all good. Very thankful for the support that I've been able to get from this excellent group of negotiators that I'm working with, from every single island, very invested in this, very devoted, very hardworking, and also from a very dedicated crew of ministers who've been assisting me. And I must also give a big shout out to the Secretary General of CARICOM, Ambassador Owen Larocque. He has been with us from day one, from the Leaders Summit on the very first day up until now, and he will be with us until the end. And that's unprecedented for the Secretary General of CARICOM to understand the importance of this and to invest his time, his effort. I know he had a budget committee meeting 2 days ago, and he actually had to do it via teleconference. So it shows you the commitment that we have from our top regional institution. Didacus Jules, Dr. Jules of the OECS is also here. And I think that has really helped. So for me, it's a humbling experience, but it's also quite satisfying to see how we're progressing as a Caribbean region. And you know, when the naysayers say there's no such thing as regional integration, Caribbean unity, this really is you can get no better example of a region pulling together, working together for something that is really, it really talks to the heart of life and the future of our Caribbean region, and particularly for our young people. So I'm humbled, but I'm very pleased at how it's going. Yeah, no problem.
We're speaking here with St. Lucia's lead climate change negotiator, Mr. Crispin Dovey. Mr. Dovey, compared to previous climate change talks at a COP level, how prepared were Caribbean negotiators and ministers this time around?
This year we had 3 or 4 prep meetings in St. Lucia alone. Okay, so in other words, CARICOM negotiators came together 3 or 4 times. Ministers have been briefed. They're being briefed here. So we've had some excellent, I think, preparations, and I have to commend our ministers, including our own minister, Mr Fletcher. I also have to commend the CARICOM heads for really recognizing the importance of this agreement and allowing their ministers to do what needs to be done, and also making their presence felt when necessary.
How have the COP21 negotiations been from a Caribbean perspective, and what are some of the main issues at stake?
Well, everything has its own, its own issues, so to speak. And so no one issue has been easy to negotiate. Some of the sticking points, as you've heard, the 5, that is gaining some traction. Most parties have expressed a desire or a willingness to see 1.5 enshrined somewhere in the agreement. We want it in as meaningful a way as possible, of course. We've also had some issues with finance. Finance is one of the critical issues because that is usually one of the most difficult to negotiate, for the simple reason that, you know, who's going to provide the resources, how much is it going to be public or private finance. So that is one of the areas that's always difficult. We've had issues with another area that's of interest is whether we have 5-year cycles for reviewing our emissions pledges or our emissions commitments, because a few parties wanted it to be voluntary. Others said no, there should be, you know, a common 5-year period, you know, of review. You know, everybody reviewing at the same time. It shouldn't be voluntary, you know, and so on. And everybody should be looking to ramp up ambition. So that's been one of the areas that, you know, we would have expected to get some difficulty. Again, that seems to be getting some traction. All right. So these are some of the areas. There are others, but I just, you know, for reference, these are just some of those I've decided to.
Having participated in several climate change talks as a Saint Lucia negotiator, was there extra pressure this time around to ensure a successful outcome here in Paris?
I have to say, well, you know, the actual effort and energy put into negotiation is one thing. But for some reason, I came into this COP optimistic, because I was, as you quite rightly say, I've attended a number of COPs. I was in Copenhagen, and I saw what came out or didn't come out of Copenhagen. And I was confident that the world would not be prepared to accept another outcome like Copenhagen. And so, and also recognizing that this one was where we're supposed to come up with a momentous new agreement, that people would do their best to try to get that outcome. And I've gone into COP optimistic, and I haven't found it more stressful than other COPs necessarily. It's just that it's just been, you know, a lot of effort, a lot of work to try, you know, just to, as always, to get the respective outcomes that will come out, that will then be bundled into one big agreement.
Now, are you satisfied that our Caribbean nationals are more educated about climate change and its related issues?
I would say yes. I'm not satisfied yet. I think there's a lot more to be done, but I'm encouraged by, you know, the change I've seen, especially over this year. I think there's been a lot more attention paid to climate change, and, you know, everybody seems to know about Paris. You know, at least a lot more people seem to know about Paris and what the significance of Paris and so on. I think there's been some really good public awareness work done by our ministry and others. You know, the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and so on. And it's really been encouraging. And the 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign has certainly helped to garner momentum.
Do you think the Caribbean's voice has truly been heard at COP21?
No one party has more of a voice than any other in principle, right? Every country, you know, from the biggest to the smallest, you know, has a voice in these negotiations. And you have to bear in mind, okay, CARICOM is like 15 countries. We are part of the Alliance of Small Island States. That is something like 44 countries. Okay, when we're part of the G77 and we have unanimity, which we always strive for, you have 134 or thereabout countries. Okay, so that is you're just building up, ramping up the momentum as you go along. And I think also the fact that we've tried to be as strategic as possible to build alliances as we go along, and I think one of the reasons we've reached so far, I think, in this process, I mean collectively as you know, as not just as a region but as a global community. I think there's been a lot of engagement in this, you know, on the fringes, trying to talk to each other, to understand each other's positions, a common recognition that we want something out of this process, that, you know, that our children will not turn around and, you know, and reproach us for, you know. So I think that has helped to make life easier, or less difficult, I should say, because it's not necessarily an easy process. I don't want to mislead anybody into thinking that.
And finally, Mr. Louvain, what would a successful outcome here at the COP21 negotiations in Paris mean for Caribbean nationals and citizens of small island developing states?
Well, a meaningful agreement that has what we want in it would mean that we'll be able to restrict the level of warming to a certain extent that it is not going to cause even more grievous harm to them, because climate change already at what it is, at somewhere around 1 degree, is causing problems. Okay, and if we allow it to continue, it's going to be even worse. Okay, so the idea is really to try to contain it within a level that we believe that we can still have a shot at development. If it goes to 2 degrees and beyond and that kind of thing, I think we're staring down a gun barrel, so to speak.
Thank you, Shannon and Mr. Crispin d'Auvergne, for that informative interview. When we come back, delegates at COP21 dance to the rhythm of music from Caribbean artists, and Dr. Didacus Jules takes to the podium.
Yo, Alpha, Monster, this one is global. 1.5 to stay alive. Caribbean people are survivors on the line. We can't afford to waste time. That's 1.5 to stay alive. We should be in a warning. Then we come together to fight against global warming. Yes, we can't afford 2 degrees increase. All the policy makers have to consider this. Yeah, we must keep it under 1.5. Climate change is a serious thing, so we got to do what is right and hold it down. The temperature, hold it down. It's too much heat, hold it down. Natural disasters on the increase, hold it down. Sea levels rising, hold it down. Mother Earth is crying, hold it down. We must do something now. 1.5 to stay alive. Caribbean people are survivors on the line. We can't afford to waste time. That's 1.5 to stay alive. We should be in a warning. There we come together to fight against global warming. Yeah.
We in the Caribbean and other island states across the Indian, Pacific and Atlantic Ocean are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. Although we contribute least to global warming, we are likely to suffer most from its adverse effects. So join the movement and let your voice be heard. We cannot allow global temperatures to increase by more than 1.5 degrees.
No. St. Vincent, Grenada, hold it down. St. Kitts and Antigua, hold it down. Martinique, Jamaica, hold it down. Dominica, yeah, hold it down. In the Indian Ocean, hold it down. In the Pacific Ocean, hold it down. From Mama Africa back to Saint Lucia. 1.5 to stay alive. Caribbean people are survivors on the line. We can't afford to waste time. That's 1.5 to stay alive. We should be in a warning. Then we come together to fight against global warming. Hold it down.
Welcome back to this special edition of Sustaining Saint Lucia here from the COP21 conference in Paris. Now let's take you inside the plenary hall to hear a passionate speech delivered by the Director General of the OECS, Dr. Didacus Jules.
Madam President, we have come to Paris in unprecedented numbers at a time of exceptional pain, with the blood of innocents in the streets from Paris to Mali to Nigeria to Syria, and in many unmentioned and ignored places across the planet. We share your pain, and we share the resolve that this blood must not be spilt in vain. While we are here to find common resolve to the restoration of the health of the planet, we must also pause to express our collective determination in the restoration of hope that the children of Earth can live in peace, can embrace our diversity, can respect our differences, and can share humanity's inheritance of the earth. This image that we have brought to the podium today, painted by one of our renowned artists, Jonathan Gladden, is a metaphor of the shared vulnerability of small island states. We are standing, feeling alone, at the edge of catastrophe, held head high, struggling to breathe, but feet firmly planted on the eroding islands of our patrimony. There are no lesser children of Mother Earth, and whether we belong to the multitudinous tribes of continents or the communal isolation of far-flung islands, we all enjoy equal entitlement to a geographic room of our own. When we demand 1.5 to stay alive, we are not simply championing a development cause. We are standing our ground against the rising waters of climatic catastrophe as proudly as this young girl in this painting. We are fighting for nothing less than our survival and our right to preserve and protect the corner of earth that we have inherited from our parents, that is our sacred responsibility to pass on to our children. Our vulnerability is as slender as this iconic island girl, but we will not go under. We will stand upright. We are prepared to model the new environment of sustainable futures. We reiterate in unison with all Caribbean small island voices that we have spoken, our core demands of 1.5 to stay alive, the recognition of loss and damage, and the provision of adequate financing for adaptation features. Thank you.
Quite a passionate plea by the Director General of the OECS, Dr. Didacus Jules. We will clamor if we must, but they will hear us. 1.5 to stay alive. Now, many Caribbean artists answered the rallying call to raise their voices for climate justice. Others stayed at home to continue the advocacy, while some made the journey to Paris for COP21. My colleague Alison Kentish sat down with two of the region's best. Let's take in that interview.
He's the brother of legendary reggae artist Garnet Silk, Aaron Silk.
Blessed love, Alison.
And Belizean artist Adrian Martinez.
Love.
And these two gentlemen are lending their talents and their beautiful voices and musical skills to COP21 and have performed at the Caribbean Pavilion to a resounding applause from stopping people in their tracks. And Aaron, tell me, what has it been like so far for you, the experience at COP?
Oh, it's everything that I anticipated, you know. When I got the invitation to come, you know, I was overwhelmed, you know, and I made my plan that when I come, we were going to draw the attention of, you know, the mass people here from all the pavilions, and we did. You know, we did with the performance of 1.5 to stay alive. That's what the Caribbean need to survive. 1.5 to stay alive.
Wonderful. And tell me, how does it feel coming from Belize and you're here in Paris and you have such an important message to tell? You're telling it in song.
Yes, it is very humbling. You know, it's a humbling experience. This is one of a kind. You know, I enjoy myself, as what Aaron said. It has been hit by the Caribbean. People stopping by, people coming and listening. People make sure they kept the 12 o'clock time, because that's when we come out and perform, and people are here for that time, even before the midday time. So it's so inspiring, so touching.
And the feedback from those around
yes, the feedback has been good. It has been exceptional. We love it, you know, Caribbean as usual.
Even on the road in Paris, we hear people talking about it and asking, you know, we hear about the Caribbean Pavilion and the reggae songs and the singers, you know.
Right. So you guys are getting very popular in Paris.
Yes, I think this COP21, you know, had contributed to our cause, our talent and stuff, and I think we have made our contribution towards it, you know, tremendously. And I love it, because this was the reason, this was the whole sole purpose of being here, to be heard, to have people singing the Caribbean anthem 1.5 to stay alive, you know, and they are.
You're from Jamaica.
I am from Jamaica.
Jamaica is already seeing the effects of climate change. Your beaches are in danger, your coastlines. How important is it for you, what you're doing here, for your people back home also?
You know, before I left, you know, I was driving my car, and not even I tried to turn on the AC, and even the AC the sun was just too hot, you know, to cool the car, and I was like, wow. You can imagine, this is not even, it's close 1%, not even 1%. you know, and it puzzled me about why we asking for 1.5. We'll probably be asking to stay right there, but we know that, you know, it's over ambitious, given, you know, what it is, but most people are here asking for 2, and, you know, but 2 would not work for us because the projectors are showing that, you know, 30, 40 years from now, most of the small islands will be there. So we can't afford that. We can't afford that.
And how does it feel being an artist and being part of this 1.5 movement?
Oh no, man, it's a pleasure. You know, Rastas, Rastafari, you know, Mother Earth is, you know, and I within myself as Aaron Silk, you know, I do anything to help to preserve Mother Nature, to preserve Earth. You know, living in space is not an option. Not for me. I don't know about nobody else, but it's not for me. I want to live, and I want my children and my children's children to live here on Earth, you know, and be safe. So we're just asking all the big countries that are polluting, you know, all the emission of the greenhouse gases and things, please give us what we need to survive. 1.5 to stay alive. That's what the small island need to survive. 1.5 to stay alive. Jano.
Okay, and what about Belize in terms of climate change? What have you seen, and are you happy to be part of this movement?
I am so honored to be a part of this movement. I will be going back home feeling fulfilled that we have come and accomplished the mission. I think this is the beginning, the trend setting from the Caribbean for everybody else. I can guarantee you coming next year you will see more pavilion with music because the Caribbean have set that trend.
You have inspired.
Yes, we've inspired quite a number of people. And going back home, I will need to sit and rally the musicians, get the musicians on board to understand that this is very important. Because they too know that we are struggling with this problem. The heat, like Jamaica, is hitting Belize. We have drought in Belize as well. The farmers are struggling. Our sugarcane industry has suffered because of that. Our banana industry suffered because of that. And then our beaches, they're eroding. You know? So it's very important that the people be sensitized as to what is happening and to come on board, because this is very, very important.
So you've heard it from the artists themselves. They have delegates stopping in their tracks, listening to them, chanting along, humming along to 1.5 to stay alive. The climate change negotiators are working hard, the government officials are working hard, but the artists are also doing their part, using their talents, and they are fully on board 1.5 to stay alive.
It's getting hotter and hotter every day. Climate change is on the rise and it not play. 1.5 to stay alive. That's what we need to survive. 1.5 to stay alive. Don't let it rise above 1.5. Here on Celsius. 1.5. 1.5 to stay alive. That's what the small island need to survive. 1.5 to stay alive. 1.5 to stay alive. That's what the Caribbean need to survive. 1.5 to stay alive.
Our Caribbean artists have really been an important part of the region's artillery, both in the lead up to and here at COP21. You just heard from Mr. Aaron Silk and Adrian Martinez. Well, that's how we come to the end of this special edition of Sustain in Saint Lucia for this week. On behalf of Alison Kentish and my executive producer, Miss Caroline Eugene, here at Les Bougères in France's capital city of Paris, I am Shannon Abon saying so long for now.